Good morning, parents. We want to welcome you to the first official Shaken Families video. We're excited to start this new piece of our ministry, and we want to let you know that we're proud of you, that you're here and that you're watching this, because what that tells us is that you are taking the first step to becoming the primary discipler of your student. We want to let you know that we're excited to give you that role back. We are pumped to see how God uses that and how our families begin to develop and become a biblical model of what family should be. And so we want to let you know that every time you watch one of these videos, there should be two pieces to it. The first piece is where we're just going to let you know what we're teaching your student on Wednesday night. We want you to be aware of the points we'll be covering, the passages we'll be using, the illustrations, all that good stuff. We want to let you know what's going to be happening here on Wednesday nights so that you are aware of what's being poured into your student. The second piece of these videos is that we want you to know some helpful hints. We want to give you some ideas on how to bring that discipleship home and begin that process of becoming the primary discipler of your student. We want to give you some questions to ask, some creative ways of engaging your student. And so every time you watch one of these videos, we just want to help you in that, and that's what you can expect. So we just want to dive right in this week. We want to let you know what we're doing on Wednesday night. We're excited because we're starting a new series called Daniel. We'll be talking about the life of the prophet Daniel. We'll be talking through his book of the Bible out of the Old Testament, the things that he went through and the devotion that we see in his life. So just so you know, there are 12 chapters in Daniel. We're only covering 3 of them. So that means that you have 9 chapters of extra material that you as a family can pull from and use in the life of your student and in that discipleship process. So there's plenty of material there. Feel free to just dive right in and go for it. But just so you know what we'll be talking about, well, we're going to be covering chapters 1, chapter 2, and chapter 6. So that's what we'll be talking about over the next 3 weeks. Chapter 1 will be this Wednesday night, and it's basically just an introduction to who Daniel was, his life, and kind of the circumstances that surround his particular piece of Scripture. We'll dive right into that and kind of let you know what's going on with Daniel chapter 1. So this Wednesday night, we're going to be beginning our theme of devotion. Okay, that's what we see in the life of Daniel over and over and over again, is that he was extremely devoted to his God and that he refused to back up or back down from what he believed. He was devoted. He was going to stand by his faith no matter what. We see lots of stories about that throughout the course of the book of Daniel. In fact, we even see some stories that don't even involve Daniel. For example, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is part of the book of Daniel. It's 3 of his friends that were going to be cast into a furnace because they refused to bow down to an idol. And in the course of that story, we read an incredible verse where they answer back to the king and they say, listen, our God is going to save us. Go ahead, throw us in the furnace. Our God is going to save us. But even if he doesn't, we're still not going to worship your idol because we know it's wrong. And so they're devoted to their God. Even if their God doesn't act exactly how they think he should, they understand that he's still sovereign God and that he still deserves their worship above and beyond anything else. And so that's what the theme of this book is for us, or for this series is for us, is that we're going to be talking about devotion. Okay, so there are just a few things that we're going to be talking about Wednesday night out of chapter 1 that you need to be aware of. The first thing is that we know that devotion to God means that we live for him even when we don't feel his blessings or his presence. What you need to know about the life of Daniel in chapter 1 is that Daniel was part of a nation that had been taken over by this other nation called Babylon. Daniel was part of God's chosen people. He was part of his own nation that God had chosen and set apart and said, these will be my people. Okay. And all of a sudden this other nation steps in and says, sorry, we're taking you over, and then we're going to uproot you and bring you to our nation. We're going to indoctrinate into you our beliefs and our history. We're going to make you learn our language. We're going to make you eat our food. We're going to make you drink our drinks. We're going to give you everything that we are, and we're basically going to reproduce ourselves in you. And so Daniel is in the midst of that. In fact, Daniel is one of the upper crust. He's taken by the king because he's smarter and wiser than most of the people around him. We read in chapter 1 that the king says, give me the smartest and the best of these people that we've just taken over. Bring them to me. I'm going to pour into them for 3 years, and I'm going to teach them to be just like us. And then they're going to serve me in my kingdom. And so Daniel is one of those guys. So just to kind of let you know where Daniel is, he's been pulled out of his home. In fact, he's been taught growing up that he's part of God's chosen people, but then all of a sudden, he's pulled out of that. And so you know that in his mind, he's got to be thinking, is my God real? Daniel's got to be dealing with some major doubts at this point, because he's got to be thinking, what just happened? My God hasn't rescued us. I'm living in someone else's house. I'm being forced to eat and drink things that I don't want to eat and drink. I don't get it. But Daniel still stays strong. In fact, verses 1 through 8, towards the end of that passage, we read that Daniel chooses not to defile himself by eating and drinking what that nation has asked him to eat and drink, what the king had asked him to eat and drink. He stays devoted, even in the midst of feeling like he had been abandoned by God. It's pretty incredible. Second thing that we see is that devotion to God means that we stand for what's right, but we do it in a respectful way. Verse 8 is an incredible verse because Daniel says this. He says, listen, he goes to the chief official who's over him, and he says, I don't really want to eat the food and the drink that you're providing me with because it's against my religion to eat what you're giving me. Part of the Jewish culture of the day meant that they didn't eat particular items of food. It was considered unclean. And the king was trying to force them to eat it. He says, listen, I'm not going to defile myself with these things. But he does it in a very respectful way. In fact, I'll read you the verse. In verse 8 it says, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. I want you to see that key part there. He asked permission. Now, Daniel is supposed to be living for God. He's going to stand for what's right, but he goes about it in a good way. He pursues the right process. He doesn't just stand up and say, I refuse, and throw his fist down and get angry. He just says, listen, this isn't right. It goes against what I believe, and I'm asking your permission in a very respectful way to allow me to stand by what I grew up knowing, to allow me not just for what I grew up knowing, but for what I know is true. My God says no on these things, and because of that, I'm asking you to allow me to live by my faith. He does it in a respectful way. That's a lot different than what our culture teaches us when something isn't going the way we think it should go. It's a lot different than the way they teach us to approach it. So, devotion means that we stand for what's right, but we do it in a respectful way. Thirdly, devotion means that we trust God to provide. So here's what Daniel does. He goes to the chief official and he says, hey, chief official, give me 10 days. Test me on it. Give me just vegetables and water. That's all I want for 10 days. In fact, it wasn't just Daniel. It was Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he goes in and he gets these 10 days. The chief official says, okay, we'll test it. 10 days. I'll compare you to the other guys at the end of the 10 days, and we'll see who's better. And so 10 days go by. Daniel and his friends eat nothing but vegetables and water. At the end of the 10 days, the chief official comes back in, and sure enough, we read verse 15. It says, at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. May God provided. We know as we study about nutrition and things like that to be stronger, one of the things that you need is that you need a lot of protein. And guess what? In vegetables, there's just not a whole lot of protein. You don't go to bulk up at the gym by eating broccoli. That's not the way it works. You got to put some protein in there. And so the fact that they come out stronger and more nourished than anyone else around them, that's a God thing. And so the chief official has to step back and go, wow, that's pretty incredible. So Daniel had to trust that God was going to provide, even in the midst of logic not working. Okay. So the last thing that we see is that devotion to God brings blessings in the end. We read this at the very end of that chapter, verses 18 through 20. It just says that at the end of this time, Daniel and his friends were brought before the king, and it says that the king found them to be, I believe it's 10 times. It says, in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Man, Daniel and his friends were blessed with wisdom and knowledge and understanding. I mean, these guys got it. And because of that, they were blessed. But it started with devotion to God. That's where it began. So those are the things that we're going to be covering with your students on Wednesday night, talking about this idea of devotion. So we hope that helps you kind of understand what we're going to be talking with them about. Now we want to, again, kind of help you bring that home. What do you do as a parent sitting at home trying to disciple your student in this? How do you take those ideas? And so what we want to do this week is just offer you some conversation starters. One of the best ways to disciple your student is literally just to talk to them. Take some time out of your day to sit down and say, hey, what's going on with you today? What's happening tomorrow? What's in your world? Let me in. And then to instruct them and to train them. Okay, this is what's coming up tomorrow. Okay, this is what you should do to prepare for that tomorrow. Okay, those are things that we should be doing as parents in our discipleship process is preparing and training our students ahead of time for what they're going to see. Not leaving them to figure it out on their own, but letting them know in advance. This is how a Christian, this is how a Christ follower deals with what's coming up your way tomorrow. So that's the best way that you can disciple them. So we just wanted to give you some conversation starters over the next week that have to do with chapter 1 in Daniel. These are just some ideas to get you started. This is by no means as deep as you should go. You should go a lot deeper than this. As the conversation begins to flow, questions should start to pop in your head as you're going. Always refer back to Scripture. That's the best thing that you can do. Refer back to the story of Daniel and say, well, how did Daniel handle this? What did he do? What does this story teach us about this particular aspect of life? So just some conversation starters for you. Just a few of them. Number one, when are the times that you feel most alone? And by that we mean without the Christian influence, without friends and family who are going to be standing by you constantly, holding your hand and teaching you what faith is. Okay, so how do you or when do you feel most alone, and what do you do to get through it? Okay, so what things are you tempted by during those times? Again, for Daniel, if we go back to his story, he felt most alone, obviously, when he was uprooted and pulled out of his own city. Okay, he was moved to another city that wasn't his own, that he didn't understand, a culture that he wasn't originally a part of, and he had to have felt abandoned by his God. So what do we do with that? Okay, well, Daniel gets tempted. He gets tempted by what? The king's food and drink. So how do we deal with that? Well, he goes on and he says, I'm going to respectfully decline these things. So what do you do as a student? You go in, you get tempted by something. What are those things that you're tempted by? When you feel like God has abandoned you, when you feel like you're all alone, what things pop up and tempt you? And how do you deal with them? Okay, number 3, how can you remain devoted when those temptations arise? Okay, so these are the things you're tempted by. Great. What do you do when that temptation comes up? Do you give in? How do you stand strong? What passages can you memorize that when those temptations come up, you should immediately pop back into your head? Those kind of questions would be good things to ask. Number 4, have you ever felt abandoned by God or like God was mad at you? When and why? For Daniel, again, it was this time of being uprooted from his family. But for you, your student, when have you felt abandoned by God? I think you'll be surprised when your student tells you the answer to that question. You may not even realize that they've been dealing with doubt. You may not even realize that they've been dealing with questioning whether or not God is even real. You may be surprised. So just some good conversation starters for you. We hope that these videos are helpful. We hope that you'll share these with some friends and family. Share them on Facebook. Feel free. Look forward to them every week. We'll let you in on what we'll be talking about each week. We'll look forward to seeing you back here next week. Thanks. Bye.